The second I spotted my name tag at my son's wedding reception, I understood exactly what Vanessa Mitchell had always thought of me. Dorothy Mitchell, the charity case. Her whole wealthy family burst out laughing when they saw those cruel words, written in her flawless calligraphy. I forced a polite smile, pinned the tag to my navy dress, which suddenly looked cheap next to their designer gowns, and slipped away to make one quick phone call. By the next morning they would learn what real charity feels like. If you're listening, stick with me because this story doesn't begin there. It actually started 6 months before that humiliating Saturday evening in June. My son Daniel had fallen head over heels for Vanessa Mitchell, a stunning 29-year-old from one of those old Boston families. The kind of money that builds museum wings and slaps family names on university libraries. When Daniel first brought her home, I noticed the look on her perfectly sculpted face as her eyes swept over my small living room, the worn couch and the family pictures in discount store frames. "How quaint," she said, her voice dripping with sugar that tasted like vinegar. "It's so refreshing to meet someone who isn't obsessed with material things." Even then I bit my tongue. My boy was happy. And at 42 he deserved to be. If only he'd looked past her beauty to see the ice underneath. But love, as I've learned in my 68 years, can make fools of the wisest men. The engagement party was my first real taste of the battlefield I was walking into. Held at the Mitchell family estate in Westchester, it was a parade of wealth that nearly knocked the breath out of me. Crystal chandeliers dangled from painted ceilings, the kind I'd only ever admired in museums. The guest list read like a social registry, filled with people whose small talk was all yacht clubs and charity galas where I'd never be welcome. Daniel's soon-to-be mother-in-law, Margaret Mitchell, introduced me around with a tone that made it clear I was a stain on her daughter's perfect life. "She's from Indiana," she said, dragging out the word as if Indiana were some far-off forgotten land. Still I smiled, praised the hors d'oeuvres, and pretended not to notice the way conversations froze whenever I stepped closer. Patience, I reminded myself. Some games take time. And patience has always been one of my best talents. The wedding planning only proved how deep the Mitchell family's contempt really went. Every decision was made without asking me, though I offered more than once to help. When I suggested paying for the rehearsal dinner, Margaret actually laughed in my face. "Oh, Dorothy, that's so sweet," she said, almost cooing. "But we couldn't possibly let you strain your limited resources. This wedding is going to be very expensive, you understand." Limited resources. If only she knew. I kept up the role they wanted to see. The struggling widow, the woman who cleaned houses and took odd jobs just to get by. It wasn't a total lie. I had done those things, but not in years. Not since my Harold passed and left me his little empire. But the Mitchells didn't need to know that. Not yet. Daniel tried to pull me in, bless him. He'd call with updates about venues and menus, always apologizing for another event where somehow my invitation never showed up. "Mom, I'm sure it was just an oversight," he'd say whenever I asked about the cake tasting or the flower meeting. "Vanessa's been under so much stress." Stress? Maybe. But planning a $200,000 wedding while figuring out how to cut out your future mother-in-law. Yeah, that might wear anyone thin. The bridal shower told me everything I needed to know. I hadn't been invited, of course. Daniel had begged Vanessa to reconsider. "It would mean so much to Mom," he'd said. So she sent me a last-minute invitation, the kind that makes it clear you're only included because someone twisted her arm. I showed up at the country club with a modest gift, a simple crystal vase from Macy's. Nothing flashy, nothing that would seem out of place for a woman in my supposed financial situation. The other gifts? Pure luxury. Hermes scarves, Tiffany jewelry, silk lingerie worth more than most people's rent. When Vanessa unwrapped my vase, she held it up with a look you'd give to something dead on the side of the road. "How practical," she said brightly. "Every bride needs something from the discount store." The laughter that followed wasn't warm or kind. It was sharp, the kind of laughter rich people make when they believe they found something beneath them. I just smiled, sipped my champagne, and memorized every face, every cruel chuckle. Information, I've learned, is far more valuable than pride. The wedding day itself was picture perfect. Blue skies, a soft breeze, the kind of weather photographers pray for. The Mitchell estate had been transformed into a fairy tale, with white roses twining up trellises and string quartets tucked into corners of the gardens. I'll admit it was breathtaking. Money, whatever its source, can certainly buy beauty. I had chosen my outfit with care. A simple navy dress from Nordstrom Rack. Elegant enough but understated. Nothing that would pull focus from the bride or catch the photographer's lens. I wanted to fade into the background. Sometimes the best revenge begins by being overlooked. The ceremony was beautiful. Watching Daniel's face as Vanessa walked toward him in her $15,000 Vera Wang gown almost made me soften. For just a moment I wondered if maybe I had misjudged her, if love might smooth her edges. Then she caught my eye as the rings were exchanged, and the look she gave me could have frozen champagne. But it was at the reception that everything truly came apart. My seat was at table 12, of course, tucked near the kitchen doors with Daniel's old college buddies and their wives. Family, real family, sat at table 1 where the Mitchells reigned like royalty. I didn't mind. It was better positioning for what was coming. That's when I saw it. The name tags, each one written in Vanessa's flawless hand. Most were simple. Margaret Mitchell, James Mitchell, Daniel Mitchell. But mine read, Dorothy Mitchell. The charity case. My breath caught not because I was hurt, I expected cruelty, but because of the audacity. She had actually put it in writing. Oh my goodness, Margaret Mitchell gasped when she noticed, her hand pressed to her throat in theatrical horror. Vanessa, darling, surely this is some kind of mistake. But Vanessa just smiled, sharp as a blade. No mistake at all. I believe honesty is important in family relationships. Then she locked eyes with me. Don't you agree, Dorothy? After all, we wouldn't want anyone getting ideas above their station. The laughter started with Richard Mitchell, booming and infectious, pulling the others along. Soon half the table was chuckling, amused by the clever cruelty of humiliating the groom's mother in public, right there at her own son's wedding. I rose slowly, set the name tag down on my purse and smiled. You're absolutely right, Vanessa. Honesty matters in family. And maybe it's time we all get a little honest. Then I turned and walked away. I slipped into a quiet corner of the Mitchell Estates library, surrounded by leather-bound books that probably cost more per volume than most people's monthly car payments. The irony wasn't lost on me. Making the call that would upend everything while standing in the middle of their prized symbols of superiority. My hands didn't tremble as I dialed. They should have, given what I was about to set in motion. But I've never been one for theatrics. Just cold, careful action when the moment demands it. Robert, it's Dorothy. I know it's Saturday evening, but I need you to execute the Mitchell portfolio adjustments we discussed. All of them. Tonight. Robert Hayes has been my attorney for 15 years. Long before Harold passed and left me his business empire. He's one of the few people alive who knows exactly how much that empire is really worth. I could hear the hesitation in his voice when he finally spoke. Dorothy, are you sure? Once we move those investments, there's no reversing it. The ripple effects will be massive. I'm very sure. And Robert, trigger the accelerated payment clauses on the Mitchell Holdings loans. Every single one of them. Silence stretched. Then carefully, that will cause immediate defaults. Richard Mitchell won't even have 72 hours to respond. 48 maybe. That should be plenty. Through the tall library windows, I watched the wedding guests on the terrace, their champagne glasses sparkling in the last golden light. After all, I added, we wouldn't want to be unreasonable. And if they tried to negotiate? I thought of Vanessa's name tag. Of the laughter. Of 3 long years of quiet preparation that had led to this night. Tell them, I said, the charity case sends her regards. When the call ended, I returned to the reception, just long enough to kiss Daniel goodbye and congratulate the new couple. Vanessa was glowing in her so-called victory, graciously accepting praise for her honesty with a fake modesty that made my jaw ache. She didn't realize she'd just set off her own financial apocalypse. Leaving so soon? She asked sweetly as I approached the head table. But we haven't even cut the cake. I'm sure you'll manage without me, I answered just as sweetly. You're so good at making do with less. Her laugh chimed like shattering glass. Oh, Dorothy, you're hilarious. I do hope we can keep this understanding between us. Understanding. Yes, we had one now. She understood she could humiliate me in public and believe she'd never pay for it. And I understood exactly who she was beneath the polished surface. What she didn't yet grasp was who I was beneath mine. The next morning I sat on my little apartment balcony with a cup of coffee and waited. By my math, Richard Mitchell would get the first notice around 8 a.m. Banks don't waste time when billions are at stake. Not even on Sundays. People think money shouts, but in my experience it whispers. The real power is knowing which whispers matter and which ones you ignore. Harold taught me that during our 35 years together, as he built his investment firm from a single-room office into a financial empire that stretched across every major market on the East Coast. When he died 3 years ago, everyone expected me to sell. They assumed a widow in her 60s would want to downsize, buy a condo in Florida, and live off the interest. They were wrong. No one expected me to step into Harold's shoes and discover I had a natural gift for spotting the weak points in other people's financial armor. The Mitchell family had been surprisingly easy to unravel. They called themselves old money, but like so many old money families, their fortune was more smoke and mirrors than reality. Mitchell Holdings survived on leveraged investments and a delicate web of debt. Pull the right piece from that Jenga tower and the whole thing would collapse. What made it all the more satisfying was how simple they'd made it. Richard Mitchell worked for Meridian Financial, one of the companies I owned shares in. He had no idea that the little old widow his daughter-in-law loved to ridicule was quietly controlling his paycheck. Margaret Mitchell's charity boards? Every one of them relied on grants from the Mitchell Foundation. Harold's final gift to me, hidden behind a name so ordinary that no one ever bothered to connect the dots. Even their estate, that magnificent mansion where they hosted the wedding, was mortgaged through a Mitchell Holdings credit line. A line of credit that, as of 8 o'clock that morning, was already in default. At 8:17 a.m. my phone buzzed. Daniel. Mom, I just got the strangest call from Vanessa. She's hysterical about some financial emergency. Her dad's been on the phone with lawyers all morning. Something about investments and defaults. Do you know anything about this? I sipped my coffee and watched a cardinal fuss with its nest in the oak tree outside my window. Why would I know anything about their finances, sweetheart? I'm just the charity case, remember? Mom, please. This isn't funny. Vanessa's really shaken. She says her family might lose everything. That can't be right, they're loaded. Are they? I asked softly. Or do they just spend like they are? Pause. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Daniel, that sometimes what looks like wealth is just very expensive debt. And sometimes the people you think are powerless are the ones holding all the cards. The line went quiet. Finally, my son whispered, Mom, what did you do? I smiled, remembering Vanessa's name tag still tucked neatly inside my purse. I made a phone call. By noon that Sunday, my quiet little apartment had turned into mission control, watching the Mitchells' world crumble piece by piece. I'd spent years studying financial statements the way other people devour mystery novels. And the Mitchell Holdings portfolio? It was a thriller. Robert called me every hour with updates. By his third call he sounded almost breathless. This morning was just the beginning. Meridian Financial is reviewing every employee with possible conflicts of interest. Richard Mitchell's position is hanging by a thread. And the house foreclosure proceedings will start Tuesday unless they come up with $2.3 million by close of business tomorrow. Given their liquidity issues, that's not happening. I had prepared thoroughly. For 6 months, while I played the role of modest mother-in-law, I'd been quietly acquiring control over everything the Mitchells relied on. Not directly, of course. That would have been easy to trace. Instead, through shell companies, partnerships, and carefully layered trusts. Structures that would take a team of forensic accountants months to untangle. And the beauty of it all was the timing. The wedding itself had stretched their credit to the breaking point. That $200,000 spectacle meant to flaunt their wealth? It had been paid for with borrowed money. Money they were never in a position to borrow in the first place. All I'd really done was call in those loans all at once, like yanking out the foundation blocks of a house of cards. My phone rang again. Daniel's voice was tight, almost panicked. Mom, Vanessa's parents are losing it. They're talking about selling the house, letting go of their staff, even canceling the country club memberships. Her dad might lose his job. What kind of phone call could possibly cause all this? The kind that happens when people mistake kindness for weakness, I said calmly. When they forget that quiet folks often have the loudest voices, when they finally choose to use them. This is about the name tag, isn't it? Daniel's voice cracked. Mom, I saw it. I asked Vanessa about it last night. She swore it was just a joke. A joke, I repeated, letting the word roll bitterly off my tongue. Yes. I imagine she thought it was funny, right up until this morning. Can't you undo whatever you did? Vanessa's a wreck. She keeps saying this will ruin their reputation, that they'll never recover from the shame. Shame, I said quietly. Now that's an interesting choice of words. And what about mine, Daniel? What about the shame of being humiliated at my own son's wedding, by a woman who's never worked a day in her life? She was wrong, Mom. I know that. But, destroying her whole family? That feels extreme. I stood, pacing into the kitchen where Harold's photo still sat on the counter. He taught me many things, but the lesson I valued most was this. Respect isn't handed to you. It's earned. And sometimes, it has to be taken. I haven't destroyed a thing, Daniel. All I've done is pull back the curtain. Their so-called wealth was always an illusion. I just stopped pretending it was real. Pause. Then softly, so what happens now? I caught my reflection in the window. No charity case, not the woman Vanessa thought she'd mocked. What I saw was Harold's true partner. His equal in business as in life. Now, I told him, we'll see if your wife wants to learn the meaning of real charity. Because if she hopes to save her family, she's going to need help. And as she pointed out yesterday, apparently I'm in the charity business. Monday morning delivered exactly what I expected. A call from Vanessa herself. Her voice no longer carried arrogance. What I heard instead was something brand new. Desperation. Dorothy, I need to talk to you. Could we meet for coffee? Of course, dear, I said sweetly. I always make time for family. Even family who thinks I'm nothing but a charity case. Her silence spoke volumes. She tried to begin some apology about that, but I cut her off. Let's meet at Marlowe's Diner on 5th Street. 1 o'clock. You know where it is, right? It's not exactly your usual scene, but I'm sure you'll manage. Marlowe's was perfect. A no-frills diner where a woman in designer clothes would look as out of place as a peacock in a chicken coop. When Vanessa walked in at exactly 1, I barely recognized her. The flawless hair, the airbrushed makeup, gone. She looked 5 years older overnight, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Thank you for meeting me, she said, sliding into the cracked vinyl booth across from me. Her hands trembled as she picked up the laminated menu. I don't even know what to order. I've never eaten in a place like this. The meatloaf special is excellent, I suggested. And affordable. I imagine that's important to you now. She flinched at the word affordable but nodded. When the waitress came, a weary woman about my age named Dolores, Vanessa couldn't even meet her eyes. Funny, I thought. Wealth had always given her confidence. Without it, she could barely look up. So, I said after we'd ordered, what exactly can I do for you, Vanessa? She drew in a shaky breath. My father's going to lose his job. We might lose the house. Everything's falling apart and I don't understand how it could happen so fast. These things rarely happen overnight, dear, I replied softly. They build up like water behind a dam. Then one day the pressure breaks and it all comes crashing down at once. Can you help us? The words came out strained, like they hurt her to even say. I stirred sugar into my coffee, deliberately slow. Help you? I'm just the charity case, remember? What could someone like me possibly do for someone like you? Her eyes dropped. I was wrong to write that. I was angry and stupid and I took it out on you. I'm sorry. Sorry, I echoed. That's a start. But hardly enough. What exactly are you asking me to do, Vanessa? I don't know. Daniel said you made some kind of call, that you might have connections. If there's anything you could do to help us, I'll do whatever it takes. Anything. Dangerous word, especially when spoken to someone you've underestimated. Well, I said thoughtfully, I might know some people. But charity isn't free, dear. There are always conditions. Hope flickered across her tired face. What kind of conditions? I pulled a folded sheet of paper from my purse and slid it across the table. I took the liberty of writing out a few simple requirements. Nothing too hard for someone as capable as you. Her hands trembled as she read. Confusion, then disbelief, then the slow edge of horror spread across her face. You want me to work as a cleaning lady, for 6 months? Not just any cleaning lady, I corrected. You'll work for Sunshine Cleaning Service. That's the same company I worked for before Harold passed. Mrs. Patterson runs a fine business. She'll show you what honest work feels like. But I've never cleaned anything in my life. We've always had staff. Then it's time you learn. Education is so important, don't you think? I sipped my coffee, savoring the moment. Condition 2. You'll volunteer at the homeless shelter every Saturday for a year. Serving food, scrubbing toilets, whatever they ask of you. Oh, a homeless shelter? Her voice barely carried across the table. The very same one your mother's charity board claims to support, but has never actually visited. You'll get to know the people you've been helping from such a distance all these years. Her face paled as she read on. You want me to live in your apartment building? In a studio? Just until you can afford something better on your cleaning lady salary. It's a good building. I live there myself, remember? Though I suppose you'll be seeing more of it than you planned. The waitress returned then, sliding the meatloaf special in front of Vanessa. She poked at it without eating, clearly struggling to process her new reality. And if I agree to all of this, she finally whispered, you'll help my family? I'll make some calls, I said smoothly. Maybe see about fixing those pesky defaults. Perhaps even put in a kind word for your father at his firm. I paused, watching her closely. Though I should mention, I hold a bit more influence at Meridian Financial than you might expect from a charity case. Something flickered in her eyes, the first spark of suspicion that I was not at all the woman she thought I was. What kind of influence? She asked. I smiled, just enough to keep her guessing. The kind that comes from knowing the right people. Your father works in acquisitions, doesn't he? Corporate buyouts. Yes, but I don't see what that has to do with. Oh, I think you'll find it has everything to do with your situation, I interrupted smoothly. Vanessa, companies like Meridian don't just bleed money overnight. Not unless someone with real power decides it's time. Her fork slipped from her hand and clattered onto the plate. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe you should have asked more questions about your new mother-in-law before you chose to humiliate her in public. Background research, dear, is essential in business and in family. She stared at me like she was seeing me for the very first time. Who are you? I'm exactly who I've always been, I said evenly. The woman who raised your husband to be a good man. The woman who's watched you parade him around like an accessory to your status. And the woman who's about to give you a choice that will decide your family's future. I tapped the folded list between us. You have 24 hours. Accept my terms and I'll consider helping. Refuse and by Friday you'll discover what real charity feels like, when you're on the receiving end. Tuesday evening brought an unexpected knock on my door. When I opened it, Richard Mitchell stood there, looking as if he'd aged 10 years in 3 days. The polished executive was gone. His shirt was wrinkled, his face unshaven, his eyes hollow with the realization that his world was built on sand. Mrs. Mitchell, he said quietly. I hope you don't mind me coming unannounced. Daniel gave me your address. Not at all, Mr. Mitchell. Please come in. I stepped aside, watching as his gaze swept across my modest apartment. These were the same eyes that had once looked right through me at his daughter's engagement party. Now they catalogued every detail with desperate focus. Coffee, I offered. I'm afraid it's not the expensive blends you're used to. Coffee would be fine. He sat heavily in one of my thrift store chairs, looking almost absurd against the worn furniture and discount store decor. He cleared his throat several times as I prepared the pot, struggling to find the words. Finally, after I set his cup in front of him, he spoke. I know what you did. Do you? I asked, settling across from him, curious. And what exactly do you think I did? You orchestrated everything. The loan defaults, the sudden withdrawals, even my position at Meridian being reviewed. Someone with enormous financial power chose to destroy my family, and the timing points to you. I had to admire his bluntness. Desperation had stripped away the layers of privilege, leaving only the man underneath, raw, cornered, and honest for the first time. That's a serious accusation, Richard, I said coolly. What makes you believe someone like me could possibly have that kind of power? He leaned forward, eyes bloodshot. Because I spent all night tracing the structures of the companies that pulled out. The shells, the trusts, the investment groups. Complex, yes, but every thread led back to one source. The Mitchell Foundation. The same foundation tied to Harold Mitchell. The same Harold Mitchell who built Meridian Financial from scratch before selling it to Mitchell Holdings' parent company 15 years ago. The silence stretched as I sipped my coffee. So he had finally done his homework. Better late than never. Harold Mitchell, I said slowly, was my husband. The color drained from his face. You're Dorothy Mitchell. The Dorothy Mitchell, Harold's widow, the woman who inherited everything. Yes, I said, setting my cup down with deliberate care. Including controlling interest in the parent company that owns Mitchell Holdings. Including the investment firm that manages your family's portfolio. Including, as of last year, 60% ownership in Meridian Financial itself. The coffee cup slipped from Richard's hands, shattering against my worn linoleum floor. You've been playing us from the start, he whispered. Playing you? No, Richard. I've been watching. Testing. Trying to see what kind of people my son was marrying into. I crouched to clean the spill, gathering the broken pieces with paper towels. The engagement party, the wedding planning. Every time you thought I was meek, accommodating, harmless, I was gathering information. Learning your family's character. Your financial truths. Your values. I rose, dropping the shards into the trash. And do you know what I discovered? He shook his head, too stunned to answer. I discovered that your daughter scrawled charity case on my name tag at her own wedding. That your wife introduced me to her friends as some kind of shame she was forced to tolerate. And that your entire family found it funny to mock a woman they assumed was powerless. I straightened, brushing off my hands. But the most revealing discovery of all? None of you ever bothered to ask who I really was. You saw what you wanted to see and nothing more. Richard's voice broke. What do you want from us? For the first time in our talk, I smiled. I want you to learn what charity actually means. It means helping someone who cannot help themselves. Someone powerless, relying on someone stronger. And right now, Richard, that's your family. I walked to my purse, pulled out Vanessa's copy of my list and laid it on the table. Your daughter has until tomorrow. I suggest you encourage her to choose wisely. The following afternoon, Vanessa showed up at my apartment, with Daniel beside her. My son looked torn, hurt, like a man finally realizing neither his wife nor his mother were who he thought they were. They sat together on my small couch side by side. Mom, Daniel began, Vanessa told me about your conditions. This is insane. You can't honestly expect her to work as a cleaning lady. Why not? I asked evenly. It's honest work. I did it myself for 2 years after your father died, before I fully understood what he'd left me. Vanessa had been staring down at her hands. Now slowly she lifted her eyes to me. You really cleaned houses? She asked softly. Every day, I said. Scrubbed toilets. Mopped floors. Dusted shelves for people who barely saw me. It was humbling work, but it taught me something priceless about character. What's that? Daniel asked quietly. That how you treat the people you think are beneath you reveals everything about who you truly are. I held Vanessa's gaze. Your mother-in-law, the so-called charity case, has been cleaning up other people's messes her whole life. The only difference now is that I finally get to decide whose mess is worth my time. Her voice was a whisper, broken but steady. I accept your conditions. Daniel turned to protest, but she stopped him with a raised hand. No, Daniel. He's right. I've been cruel to your mother. If working as a cleaning lady and serving at a homeless shelter is what it takes to make amends, then that's what I'll do. And the apartment? I pressed. Leaving your comfortable life behind, living in a studio until you can afford better on your salary? Vanessa nodded, tears sliding down her face. I'll do it all. I was wrong about everything. I thought money made me better than everyone else, Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling. But I was just hiding behind my parents' wealth. And when it was gone, I realized. I don't know how to do anything useful. I studied her face carefully, searching for even the slightest flicker of manipulation. But what I saw was real, remorse, fear, and something fragile but genuine. This isn't punishment, Vanessa, I told her gently. It's education. You're going to learn skills money can't buy, empathy, humility, and the pride that comes from honest work. Her eyes brimmed with tears. And if I do this, you'll help my family? I'll do more than help, I said firmly. I'll restore everything they've lost and more. Your father will not only keep his job at Meridian, he'll be promoted. Your parents' house will be saved. Your family's reputation will rise stronger than before. Daniel looked at me stunned. How can you possibly promise that? I crossed the room to my desk and pulled out a folder I'd been saving for years. Because, Daniel, I own the companies involved. All of them. I spread the papers across the coffee table. Corporate ownership documents, bank statements, portfolios stacked with numbers big enough to make Daniel sink back into his chair. Your mother-in-law isn't just wealthy, I said softly. She's one of the most powerful women in American finance. Harold built an empire. And when he passed, he left every piece of it to me. Daniel's eyes darted across the pages, his lips moving silently as he tried to process the billions in assets, the majority stakes in 17 major corporations, including Meridian Financial, Mitchell Holdings' parent company, and most of the banks that had been circling his wife's family. Vanessa stared at the papers like they were written in another language. You could have stopped this at any time. Of course I could have, I said. But then what would you have learned? This was never about money. It was about character. And you failed spectacularly the moment you wrote charity case on my name tag. Her face burned with shame, but I leaned forward, my voice steady. Failure doesn't have to be final. Sometimes it's just the beginning of real education. Daniel shook his head in disbelief. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me any of this? Because I needed you to love me for who I am, not for what I own. Money changes people, Daniel. It makes them see dollar signs instead of human hearts. I had to know my family loved Dorothy the woman, not Dorothy the billionaire. I glanced around my modest apartment at the thrift store furniture and the second-hand curtains. Now you understand why I live simply. Why I drive a 10-year-old car. Why I shop at discount stores. Because real wealth isn't about what you spend. It's about having the power to help, and the wisdom to know when someone truly deserves it. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of Meridian Financial. Vanessa was on her knees, scrubbing the marble floor. Her once perfect manicure was long gone, her hands rough with honest work. She wore the blue uniform of Sunshine Cleaning Service, proudly. Mrs. Mitchell, she said, looking up with a shy smile. I didn't expect to see you here. I had a board meeting upstairs, I said, returning the smile. Thought I'd check in. See how you're adjusting. She leaned back on her heels, wiping sweat from her brow. It's hard work. But I'm learning things I never knew about myself. Did you know I'm actually good with my hands? Mrs. Patterson says I've got a natural talent for detail work. I'm not surprised, I told her warmly. You always had an eye for perfection. You just needed to apply it to something that mattered. Over the past 6 months, I'd watched Vanessa change. The shallow socialite who once humiliated me was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd learned the value of work, dignity, and respect. How's the shelter? I asked. Her face lit up. Wonderful. There's a little girl, Maria, she teaches me Spanish, I help with homework. I never realized how much I could learn from people I used to look down on. And the apartment? Small but comfortable, she admitted. I'll be sorry to leave when my 6 months are up, if you really keep your promise. I handed her a sealed envelope. Your father's promotion was announced this morning, Senior Vice President with a raise. Her hands shook as she read. How did you? I told you I own the company. And your parents' house is safe in a trust now. Consider it my wedding gift. Tears cut lines down her cheeks. Why, after how I treated you? Because you passed the real test, I said. Not the one where you failed me, but the one where you chose to change. Character isn't about never falling, it's about how you rise. I helped her up. For the first time she looked me in the eye as an equal. The charity case, she whispered, turned out to be the one giving charity. That's how it works, I replied. Those with the most give to those who need it most. I needed to know you were worth saving. You needed to discover who you could be once everything else was stripped away. As I turned to leave, she called after me. Dorothy, will you come to dinner Sunday? I'm cooking, for the first time. I smiled. I'd be honored. After all, we're family now. Real family, built on love, not appearances. The elevator doors closed, but I saw her return to her work with new purpose. She had learned the lesson I meant to teach. True wealth isn't measured in dollars but in the lives you touch. At my son's wedding, she called me the charity case. He meant it as a joke. Instead, she got an education. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is helping someone become who they were always capable of being. And sometimes, the greatest charity is discovering our own capacity for grace. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and share your story in the comments.